This video documentary is a collaboration between SOMA Two Towns for All Ages, the Maplewood Public Health Division, and local artist Joy Yagid. The intent is to honor the institutional memory of our seniors and give them a venue to share their experiences with what were then common childhood illnesses like polio. The hope is that future generations will start a dialogue and learn from the collective wisdom of the seniors in our community who are invaluable in providing insight to the past and the struggles that they faced during a time before vaccinations.
Hello, my name's Bob Rowe. I've been working for the town of Maplewood for the past 30 years in the health department, and I do have one vaccination story that may be of interest, especially to younger people who didn't go through it. Polio was a terrible disease. I'm sure you've heard of it, and it was a crippling disease. It could weaken your muscles, make it difficult to walk. A lot of times it infected your chest, and they had these things called iron lungs, which were machines that people were put in to breathe for them. And you may recall President Franklin Roosevelt was a healthy young man, and then he got polio, and he tried to hide it when he was president because he didn't want to be seen as weak. My recollection goes back to about 1963. I would have been about 13 years old then. And there was two types of vaccine. One was the Salk vaccine, which was an injection, and the other was called Sabin vaccine, which was an oral pill. And what happened in the United States was tens of thousands of people every year would get polio. And so they decided, and as a nationwide program, they were going to vaccinate everybody, and especially children who had probably never been exposed to polio. So over the course of 3 Sundays, and I believe it was in April 1963, in New Jersey, every school had a day. There were 3 types of oral vaccine you had to get, and they would put it on a sugar cube. And every Sunday, for 3 Sundays in a row, you would line up, people would drive up to their school, you'd line up, and you'd get your sugar cube. And this was done nationwide, and the result was that it virtually eliminated polio in the United States.
I think there should be no reason to exclude, unless you had 2 independent doctors agreeing that the kid was too ill or was allergic, and it would be a very unusual situation. And in no way should a whole community be allowed to expose the rest of the world to something preventable. And measles is no simple little disease. You can come up deaf, you can come up with all sorts of problems from measles, and so I'm right with them. What if it's your child who gives measles to a whole group? What if it's your child that brings polio back when it should be eradicated? Diphtheria, I had as a baby, but I don't remember that. And it was a reason a lot of babies didn't survive. And I heard from my mother's friends, one woman had a child with diphtheria, and she was digging the mucus out of the back of this child's throat, by my hand, and the kid survived. But it's, you don't realize what dreadful diseases these are.
Oh my goodness. Well, I think I had every single communicable disease except scarlet fever. I had whooping cough, measles, and mumps, and chickenpox. All of them I really don't remember, except for the fact that with measles, for some reason at that time, you had to be in a darkened room, and of course had to stay in bed Well, we were kind of, my mother was kind of ahead of her time, I think, because most people had a family physician, but we already had a pediatrician. And he made house calls, unheard of today. But he came out as soon as my mother called and said there was something wrong, that I had a rash or whatever. And so he would come to the house. Now, he had to report that to the city health department if you had any of those communicable diseases. And as soon as the health department knew about that, they sent someone to your home and they put up a sign on your door. Nobody was allowed to come into your home. And for a specific time period, I'm not sure if it was a week or 2 weeks, but you were an excommunicado for that period of time. And then as soon as he said that you were fine, then the sign came off of your door. But that went for everything, the diphtheria, but by that time there wasn't so much diphtheria, but measles and mumps and chicken pox and all of those good things.
Yeah, measles was rampant in our area. I remember, and we had chicken pox too, and typhoid fever in Jamaica. Yeah, we had a outbreak of polio at the time, and it was not universal. Well, when I say outbreak, I was working in the hospital, and we had this little boy, and he was ill, very ill. And, I remember it very well. He didn't, want me to leave him for a minute. And then the following morning, when I was off duty, I was doing nights, I left and went from Essex to Nottingham. And then I went on vacation for a couple of weeks, and when I came back, the hospital was on a quarantine because the little boy had polio, but we didn't know it at the time. Like I said, it was an outbreak of polio, and I had 2 patients I can remember. They were 2 young girls. They were about 17 years old. The name of one was Sheila, I remembered. And they couldn't do anything for themselves. You had to wash them, do everything, because they had suffered paralysis. So they had, they couldn't even scratch their nose. It was that bad. Like I said, I worked on the orthopedic floor, and then they had, quite a few who had wheelchairs and crutches. And it was quite bad.
It was a great park. I think I was only there a couple times, but we were not allowed to go there when I was growing up because my mother always called the pool there. Her reference was polio pool. And I didn't know what she was talking about. And it was many years later that it came to vogue where I would see kids in iron lungs. And it still gives me the chills to know what was going on and how this person was completely immobilized in this tube or iron lung. And my mother, she and her sister, she was a twin, they grew up in Maplewood also, and they went to, when the polio scare was really quite high, their parents took them up to Connecticut, out of the city life area. So they moved out of the area just to avoid it. It was, for her, it was quite scary also. Having my wife in the preschool for 30 years, it wasn't until, I guess she was in a couple of years, that the trend came to not get vaccinated because of whatever was put out there, that there was some sort of a adverse effect to the vaccination. And their policy over at the church was, you're not coming if you're not vaccinated, which I think is a pretty good thing, because one person could infect the whole, and at that age, anything that comes out of their mouth, and it's either they put it in or they take it out of their mouth. So there's many chances of contracting whatever.
The first one is probably from I think it's either 44 or 45. And this, of course, was 10 years, I think, before the Salk and Sabin vaccines. And my little town down south was very affected by this. We had several victims, and one in my own neighborhood, around the corner, and the next street over, a young teenage girl, very pretty, very friendly, very popular young girl. One day she was alive, the next day she was dead. It was, of course, very upsetting to everyone, because we knew her. Edna was her name. And the whole town was terrified by this, what was happening to us. I don't know of any other deaths, but there were several people who were struck. I wouldn't exactly call it panic, but I mean, everybody was very aware. I'm talking about when Edna died. Everybody was very aware, and yet didn't know. We didn't know what was the right thing to do. You know, it just seemed like somebody would be struck down like that, and almost without warning. So far as I know, she hadn't been ill. I can almost remember her. I mean, she was a very pretty young woman, you know, and it was very sad. And this is from New Jersey. This is my late husband's cousin. He was he was in the Navy. He was struck with polio the day after he got out of the Navy, around 1955. This says it was just before the Salk vaccine became available and eventually eradicated the disease. Now, however, he received specialized therapy quickly, which probably saved him from living the rest of his life in an iron lung, as many with the disease had to do.
My brother, this was 1948, my brother was 12 years old, and he got polio, which at that time was very frightening. Not only could people become paralyzed, but people did die. And he actually wound up with a withered left arm and left leg, and that affected his whole life. You know, one of his friends many years later said to me that before he got polio, he said, Martin, brother, he said, was the most natural athlete I'd ever seen. Well, of course, that was the end of that. And my brother spent months in what was then known as the Essex County Isolation Hospital, where they put people who had various diseases, especially including polio, and it was a huge hospital in Belleville. The children's section was 8 stories high. So my brother spent months there, and then when he left, he was told by a Dr. Henry Kessler. Many people in this area, I'm sure, are familiar with the Kessler Institute, which does a lot of physical therapy all over the area. It was originally in Dr. Kessler's home, I think, in Newark. Then it was in West Orange, and now has many satellite offices. So Dr. Henry Kessler told my brother that he would never walk without crutches. My father looked around, tried to find something, and there was a Dr. Wilner, who was an orthopedist in Newark, who had converted the basement of his home into a place for physical therapy. I remember going there. I mean, many times my brother went, I don't know, was it 2-3 times a week? And through the physical therapy, he was able to walk without crutches. He has walked with a limp his whole life, but at least he walks without crutches. It's true. My father, when he was a child, actually had smallpox. If he lifted the hair over here, you could see all the little smallpox scars that he had. So he had smallpox. When I was a baby, I actually had whooping cough. I was told that many, many times. And my whole life, I've had a shortness of breath problem. And I don't know if it goes back to the whooping cough I had as a child or not. I also knew a couple of adult men who had mumps and then became sterile because of that. They became very ill and then became sterile because of that. So mumps, maybe for children, isn't a big deal, but in an adult, that's also something that can make a huge, huge impact on your life. I remember lining up for the polio vaccine in my school, Peshine Avenue School in Newark, and I remember lining up in the auditorium for the polio vaccine. And in those days, people were thrilled that there was a vaccine for polio. I don't know if anyone opted out for any reasons whatsoever, but people were so happy that they finally now had a vaccine for this. Okay, say people were absolutely thrilled. So yeah, we lined up in the school auditorium to be vaccinated. But as I say, I don't remember anyone opted out or had their parents had them opt out, because this was a very, very good thing that people were very, very happy about. I would say because people didn't have to worry about this anymore. So you didn't have to worry about the pools being closed or hanging out with other kids, that type of thing. It meant, I would say, more carefree summers, because you were not going to have a polio epidemic that people would be very frightened of. Message. But at my age, I have seen the horrible, horrible things that went on before vaccinations. And for those who don't remember or were not alive, you would have no idea of what things were like then and the horrible things that really happened to people. And and to get your children vaccinated. I remember just so much awful stuff before vaccinations or before people could get their kids vaccinated. It was just awful. And people today they don't have that type of communal memory because they haven't seen it happen to their children, or in some cases, their adult members in their family. But it's just awful.
It's the community has become slack. And the United States has been devoid of a lot of these diseases for a long time, and they forgot what it was all about.